And we are live. What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another live episode today of Surviving the Survivor, the true crime podcast that promises to bring you the best guests in the genre. And tonight you are in for a special treat. These are two amazing stories of survival you're about to hear at the hands of domestic violence. Without further ado, right off to our guests, I will introduce them. Terra Newell is a survivor and advocate for victims of domestic abuse. At the age of 25, she defended herself against serial predator Dirty John Meehan and has since shared her story on global platforms to raise awareness about the issue. She is the heroine of the hit podcast Dirty John, with well over 80 million downloads, and has been interviewed by various media outlets, including Dateline and Dr. Oz. Terra is currently working with fellow survivor Collier Landry on a podcast called Survivor Squad. If you guys are interested in purchasing that, if you're out there watching it, you networks, you hit up Collier Landry. Terra dedicates her time to coaching and supporting other survivors. And right on cue, the handsome fellow with the guitars behind him is Collier Landry. If I had those blue eyes, I'd be the main anchor at ABC News. Collier gained widespread recognition as the creator and subject of A Murder in Mansfield. It was a film directed by two-time Oscar winner Barbara Kopple. Collier's passion for storytelling was sparked by his own traumatic childhood experience, the premeditated murder of his mother by his psychopath father. He uses both film and podcasting to creatively express and deal with his trauma, and as a platform to give a voice to others who have faced similar circumstances. Collier hosts the award-winning Moving Past Murder podcast, which offers his unique perspective on surviving true crime and overcoming adversity. He's amassed over 1.5 billion views on YouTube alone. He is a TEDx speaker and has been a guest on the Dr. Phil Show. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Twitter, it's at Podcast STS. You can support my dear mother and me at Patreon. You can also get a YouTube membership. You can also listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. And as my 8-year-old daughter says, please hit that subscribe button and the like button. It gets the algorithm chugging. Without further ado, I hope everyone's got questions lined up for both Terra and Collier. My first question is incredibly broad. I'll be honest, I didn't really know much at all about Terra and still don't. So, Terra, who is Dirty John, his relationship to you, and how did you two cross paths?
Dirty John Meehan is my mom's ex-husband who tried to murder me in self-defense, and I killed him in self-defense. I ended up stabbing him because he brought a knife, and I was able to grab that and defend myself in my attack. And my dog was also with me.
Wow.
And yeah, my mom met him on our time, so it was a quick relationship.
So they were together. How long were they together for? And when did this domestic violence and this abuse sort of start to hit home?
So they were together for 2 months, got married at 2 months, around 2 months, moved in with each other. Then at the year mark, my mom started to find information on him. My family hired a private investigator looking into him. She left him once, got back together with him probably a couple months later, and then ended it again a year later.
Okay. And then take us through this day where this happens, where you have to defend yourself. What day of the week was it? I'm sure you remember. And what led up to this?
Ooh, I actually never thought of the day of the week, but I believe it was a Friday, a Friday or a Saturday, because I was at work and I was going to the Jason Aldean concert afterwards. So I went to my work at a dog kennel. I managed the dog kennel and I also groomed dogs. Before the day before, I actually had a call about a guy wanting to get his dog's groomed. And it was a French accent. I normally get the number, but he called during feeding time and I needed to get him off the phone so I could feed all the dogs barking at me. So I, the next day, had a no-show for dogs that I was supposed to groom. I went home to get ready. My schedule was off because of that. And then I ended up going home from work 30 minutes earlier than I would have. And I got home and the gate was broken. I saw this guy. He was fiddling with a tire iron in his trunk, and he was backed up into the space. So the front of his car, the grill was in the front facing me. And I go past him. My dog's barking. I tell my dog to knock it off because I think it's just a homeless guy. And I pull into my parking spot and I get out. And then John grabs me by the waist, looks me in the eyes and says, "Do you remember me?" And then that's when I started to try to fight for my life. And I actually tried to run away first, but I was unable to get away from him. And then I realized I was being stabbed and then ended up on my back. And then knife fell and I was able to get that knife from him.
Now, do you think were you the intended target as far as you know, or was it your mother who was the target? And again, how much time had passed? Did you say a year had passed almost?
So since I originally met him, it's been 2 years. I've not really had any contact with him.
And when your mother told him to get lost, what was his reaction at that time? And did he leave right away, or was it a bumpy road? Did he come back and leave again, come back, leave again?
My mom, the first time, left him with all this information. With the private investigator, she kind of like showed him, and she ended up leaving him that time. And then the second time when she left him she was planning her leave because she realized how dangerous he was. And so he literally had lawyers in his pocket. He had therapists in his pocket. And so he had different people telling other people that, oh, like this guy is normal. You're not the normal one. And he was suing so many other people. So she had to plan her leave very carefully.
They always say with domestic violence, and we've covered this because of what's going with Anna Walsh, and I actually want to dedicate this show to her. She's now presumed dead, leaving behind 3 kids. She's, of course, the missing mom from Cohasset, Massachusetts. And believe it or not, in just the last 2 weeks, Collier, there are 5 missing women in the state of Massachusetts at the hands of what is believed to be domestic violence. None of them related. I want to get into your story too, but when you hear 5 missing women in one state in 2 weeks, and you saw this firsthand with your father and your mother, what crosses your mind?
Well, I think that, I mean, obviously, the first thing that comes to my mind is foul play, right? And the thing that is really, it's just so common. And this is something that, of course, I didn't know as an 11-year-old child, right? When I'm saying my mother would never leave me, she's dead, based upon hearing my father kill her, all the threats, the violence in the home, and I didn't realize until I got older, until I actually started doing my podcast and talking to other victims and survivors, is how rare it is that that these people get reported missing, because a lot of time goes by where they hope that they're coming back, or they're not sure, or that anything is even done about these missing person cases. And it's not due to the lack of law enforcement's wanting to be involved. It's due to the sheer volume of the cases that come through. And 95% of these missing persons cases have been because of domestic violence, and because of spousal abuse. There's usually some extenuating circumstances, like a divorce is pending, or she said, I've had enough of can I use profanity on here, Joel?
Yeah,
I've had enough
can.
of your bullshit. I've had enough of your bullshit, as my mother did, and said, look, you crossed the line. You involved our son. You introduced him to your mistress. That was the line in the sand. So when I hear about these 5 cases, first of all, I was astounded that, and somebody was very quick to point out that like they're all unrelated. But it's not surprising. I mean, it's New Year's Eve. That's the same, New Year's was the day that my mother went missing. New Year's Eve, 1989, I awoke in the middle of the night to those 2 loud thuds.
Well, let's rewind just a second, Collier, because some people may not know your story. So take us back. What year was it? This was your father. Your father was a professional. He was a doctor. What happened? Just lead us up to it. What was the marriage like prior to the murder?
Well, my parents were in the middle of getting a divorce at that time. But leading up to that, like I thought that I led a normal life for the most part. And I had a father who was a doctor, and he wasn't around a lot. And when he was around, he wasn't very nice to us. But I just kind of thought, well, I'm a lucky kid because I had friends whose, families were from single parent households because their parents had gone through divorce. And I thought, well, I have a family unit that seems to be, intact, I suppose. And it wasn't until I started getting older, right? So I was, 9, 10, and then 11. And that's when my father introduced me to his girlfriend. And he told me he was a patient of his, but then I saw him kiss her. And this is just sort of the Cliff Notes version. I saw him kiss her in a romantic way. I'd never seen that before. And I said, and he asked me to lie about it to my mother and lie about the gift that she had gotten me, because this was on Father's Day, 1989. And I, of course, did lie to my mother. I was afraid of my father. And I also was like, you're stuck in the middle as a child. But then I felt so guilty about it that the next day I did tell her. And I sat her down. I said, Mommy, I think that, I called her Mommy, of course. I said, I think Daddy's having an affair. Because I had seen these things on television, right? I'd seen them in movies. I was old enough to sort of understand that those things work. And plus I had friends whose fathers had affairs. But I just didn't think it would happen to me. And that was the moment my mother drew the line in the sand. She said, I'm upset that you lied to me, but I'm glad that you told me the truth. And I'm sorry that your father put you in that position. And then she called him up and said, listen here, you son of a bitch. You crossed the line in the sand, because unbeknownst to me, for decades that my parents were together, they had a sort of pact, which was my father could do whatever he wanted. This was not the first time. She already knew about the girlfriend. She even knew the girlfriend was pregnant. She knew about all of them. And the deal is because I was my mother's constant companion, she said, you can do whatever you want, Jack. My father's name was Jack Boyle. You can do whatever you want. Just don't involve our kid. And that was the moment that, of course, like any typical narcissist, sociopath, psychopath, in my father's case, they push those boundaries, and because they don't apply to them. And that's what he did. And ultimately, she drew the line in the sand and said, enough is enough. And he said, well, of course, they're the injured one. And then he took her life in a premeditated way.
He's still in prison. Is that right?
He is still incarcerated to this day. So what happened is over, just to sort of get into it, is I woke up in the middle of the night on New Year's Eve, 1989. I had heard what I believe was a scream. And then I heard 2 loud thuds. And it's some muttering. That was my father's voice, very low. I couldn't make out what he was saying. And then I counted his footsteps as he walked down the hallway. And I was asleep. I pretended to be asleep in my bed. And I always slept with my door open, and I could see his feet in the doorway out of my peripheral vision. And something was telling me, don't look up. And I didn't. I somehow went back to sleep after the feet left. Went back to sleep. I woke up the next morning. I ran to my mother's bedroom, and I started scrunging through rummaging through the sheets, looking for blood. And I came downstairs and my father was on the couch and he had just taken a shower. He had a towel around his waist. He was watching CNN. And I said, "Where is my mother?" And he ignored me. And I said, "Where is my mother?" And he looked at me and he said, "Well, Collier, mommy took a little vacation." And from that moment, I knew that he had killed her. And
Wow.
he then started launching into this whole diatribe of how we're not going to call the police. We're not going to call the FBI. And mind you, I grew up in a really small town in Ohio. And my whole family, both my parents, our entire families, we're all from Philadelphia, like suburban Philadelphia, like mainline area, Ardmore, that area. And so we had been in Mansfield, in this like small town in Ohio, for a few years. But the fact that my father says to me, "We're not going to call the FBI," was like, what are you talking about? Even at that age, there was no CSI on television. I thought, that's really extreme. I'm like, okay, something is happening. And then he starts brainstorming about where my mother could have gone. And this is the interesting thing with the Anna Walsh case is he starts brainstorming like, oh, well, maybe he says that she got into a car. She came downstairs. They got into an argument. And she threw her purse and her credit cards at him. Now, he also told me that the sound that I heard was her throwing the purse. So I don't know how I hear the thud upstairs. The thud's upstairs, and then the purse was thrown downstairs. And that she, in the dead of winter in Ohio, walked out the door, no coat, no anything, walked down our driveway, which must have been a good, 30, 40 yards in the snow, and got into a car that was waiting at the end of the driveway and left. And he then started hypothesizing, oh, she went to Washington, D.C., or maybe she's contacted because my uncle lived in Washington, D.C., worked for the Department of the Navy. He started into all these sort of, false hypotheses. And the thing that caught me is we're not going to call the police. And I waited until he left. And my mother just purchased a cordless phone. I took the cordless phone upstairs because my grandmother was in the house. My father's mother had arrived the night before, and she was very close with my mother. And she arrived the night before, and she said, okay, we're going to listen to your father. We're not going to call anybody. We're going to find out your mom's okay. She's going to come back. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not happening. So I took this cordless photo and went upstairs, and I had this stuffed Garfield, like a Santa Claus Garfield, and I had written down all my mother's friends' phone numbers and stuffed them in this hat in case there was an emergency. Took the list out, and I started calling all of them. And I told them what happened, and I said, you need to call the police because I can't call the police because my dad said you can't call the police. Mm. I don't want to disobey, but you call the police. Two uniformed officers showed up in a black and white, and they started asking questions. My grandmother is apoplectic at this point because she thinks I call the police. And she's following me around the whole time in the house, and I'm trying to tell them what I heard, taking them in the bedroom, but I can't do any of that. And the officers left, and I heard nothing. And the next day I called my mother's friends again when I got a chance, and they said that it was a missing persons case. And I said to them, she's not missing. Like, she's missing, but we know what happened. She's dead, or she's been kidnapped somewhere or something. Like she's incapacitated somehow, or else she would be here with me and my sister. And that same day, a detective just happened to show up to the house because he had nothing to do. It was New Year's Day. So this is interesting. Saw the missing persons report. This is kind of weird. A doctor's wife goes missing on New Year's Eve. He comes to the house, and that is when my grandmother loses it, and she goes to call my father because he gets his way into the house because I let him in. I'm like, come on in, yeah, come on in, talk to us. And he, my grandmother is just screaming at him. She's like, I'm gonna go call my son. He's a doctor. We're gonna sue you. She goes to get the phone. I pull him aside. I said, look, my mother's not just missing. My mother is dead. I need to talk to you. Give me your card. And he gave me his business card. And it wasn't until that following day, which would have been January 2nd, 1990, when I went back to school, I went into the principal's office and I said, I need you to call this guy from the Mansfield Police Department and get him down here. I need to talk to him because school was my safe zone. because my father was gone. My grandmother was gone, and I was at school trying to be a normal kid, and my mom has disappeared. And I knew that I could talk to him. And that's what I did. And he came down to the school and I laid everything out. I told him about my history, my father's affair, the mistress, the nasty divorce, my father's proclivity for violence with us growing up, and everything that was going on in the home. And I said, look, I'm going to go home and I'm going to go upstairs where we have a crawl space where there's a bookshelf. And I'm going to pull that bookshelf out. I'm going to look for her body or clues, or I'm going to try to find her purse because I knew she would never leave her house without this one purse. And I think I legit think that he thought I was crazy, but this started the whole investigation. And that's when they started looking at my father, and they started sending, kept coming to the house to try to talk to my dad and say, hey, can I talk to Dr. Boyle? And then of course my father's divorce attorney was there. And he said, no, we're not going to talk to anyone. And then of course the media is calling, like people are like, okay, so what's going, much like this case, it's like almost a carbon copy in a lot of ways.
Well, your wherewithal at that age is unreal. Like, I don't think I would have that at my current age. And it reminds me in some ways of my mother's story. My mother, as you know, Collier, is a Holocaust survivor, and her father was taken from her at their front door in Yugoslavia. She was 4.5, and she was hidden in a Catholic school for boys and had to pretend among all the nuns and all the other people in there that she was Catholic and had to say Catholic prayers, and that she was a boy. So it's amazing the strength people get, especially at these young ages, being able to be nimble on their feet, if you will. So very impressive. I want to kind of weave back and forth between both your stories, but
sure.
Terra, to you, there's a comment up from Sharon. My goodness, Terra, your story is something from a movie. Pleased to see how you took your horrendous event of life to something good with your podcast. Bless you. How has it been for you to, be a part of that podcast, to have so many downloads, for people to know your story now? Has it been cathartic in a way? Has it been therapeutic?
It has definitely been therapeutic and cathartic. I say it's interesting because like people think because it's so well known that I've made money from that. And I haven't necessarily made money from the podcast because it was through the LA Times and Wondery, and they are the ones that really seek the profit from that. So it's been interesting hearing that so many people know my story, and I'm kind of like seen as a pseudo celebrity in a sense. So it's been like an interesting journey with that because I never would have thought, oh wow, people are gonna know my story. And it's crazy because like I'll ask someone and it's 75% of the time like they'll be like, oh yeah, no, I know that story. And so it's really interesting from that aspect, but I've really been happy that it's helped so many women just have awareness about their own situations if they were with someone that has similar mentalities and similarities like Dirty John. That has been really important, creating that awareness, and that was our goal with speaking out, just to create awareness and show people that they're not alone.
And the comments and questions are starting to roll in. This one from Nina MC, Nina Mac. Terry, you weren't the one investigating. You weren't the only one investigating John. It was your sister. Why did he target you, do you think? So just tell us about that. What was your sister doing?
So it was my two sisters and my brother-in-law, and somehow my cousin said he was involved, but I don't remember him being involved in it. So they hired a private investigator. They called me, let me know, and I actually had nothing to do with the private investigating. I was just aware of everything happening from both ends. And so I believe I was testified because I was the one staying completely out of stuff. I was the one saying, "Oh, I'm willing to work with John and work things out." I was the one using reverse psychology in a sense, where I was being like, "Hey, let's talk it out. Let's get together." And I was being cooperating, but he wasn't. And so that was showing that I was kind of playing his game in a sense, but the nicer version.
And then yeah, that's I just can't get over the fact that you guys could face this kind of adversity the way that you have and continue to. We had Wendy Murphy on, who's one of the kind of the preeminent experts on domestic violence in the country, to talk about Anna Walsh. And she's also a feminist in a lot of ways and says women must fight back, and women can't be stigmatized, and you can't blame the woman. She used a hypothetical for wearing, let's say, a short skirt and then a guy assaults her. She says there's not equal protection under the law. So a lot of things need to be fixed. I want to get back in a few moments to how he got the name Dirty John. But first, Lucy, I've never seen a child testify like you did, Collier. You did everything you could. It was about a year later, was it, the trial? And what was it like testifying against your father, in essence?
Well, the first thing is, I kind of want to go back to what you were saying about Wendy Murphy, because that is a thing that we hear so much in this society, is people will try to somehow, and Terra and I talk about this a lot on our podcast Survivor Squad, which is coming out soon. And when we engage with other survivors, there is this survivor shaming. There is this victim shaming. And I've heard it. Oh, they were asking for it. Oh, that is my own, people still will say things or try to excoriate my mother for, oh, she just wanted to stay in the relationship because he was a doctor and he had money. And I'm like, well, my mother actually is the one who put him through medical school by working because she got her degree first. It's very easy to be the Monday morning quarterback in these situations. It's very easy. And, oh, I would have done things differently. Oh, I would have done this. But regarding my father and testifying against him, the unfortunate thing in my situation is that through all of this, 25 days later, they arrest my father. I had found a picture of a house and a picture of my father's girlfriend with her 2 children in front of a fireplace that was covered in plastic. They were both together. They were in my father's truck because I was rummaging through the truck when he went into a gas station. This was the middle of January 1990. And that was ultimately where they found my mother's body buried underneath the basement floor. So my father purchased this house with the intent of basically making it her crypt. And then moving in there, obviously, with his girlfriend, his pregnant girlfriend, and her kids, and probably myself and my sister, who was adopted, 6 months prior. So, my father's side of the family wanted nothing to do with me because they were of the mindset, and still under this control in a lot of ways, with my father being a psychopath, that I was responsible for him getting caught. And I was in a lot of ways. But somehow that he should have been allowed to do whatever he wants. And so they didn't want anything to do with me. On the flip side,
what's that relationship like now between you and your father's family?
There is no relationship.
None.
Very little, if anything.
And with your mother's family, are you still in touch?
So then the other side of the coin is my mother's side of the family wanted nothing to do with me because my mother's sister, who was my godmother, and I'm Catholic, I grew up Catholic, it's my godmother. She said to me verbatim, "We cannot take you in because you look like your father." So I was turned over to the state, much like these kids are in the Anna Walsh case. And I was thrown into the foster care system. And the trial didn't start for about 6 months. And I had to, while in foster care, come to terms with everything that I was facing, but also, I testified at the grand jury to help secure his indictment first for the murder charge after he was arrested. And I had to find the strength, and this is all a testament to my mother, and how she raised me, but I had to find the strength in myself to, at the nadir of my life, say, I'm going to confront this man because what he did was wrong, and he's not going to get away with this. I know what I heard. I know what I witnessed, and I'm going to honor my mother. I'm going to honor myself. I'm going to tell the truth. And that's what I did. I testified at his trial for 2 days. The trial was a month long. I testified at his trial for 2 days, and he is still incarcerated to this day.
And have you had any contact with him?
I had a relationship with my father for decades, because after my father was incarcerated, you have to, when you talk about trauma, this is a lot of things that I talk about on my podcast, is when you go through this type of trauma, it's called moving past murder for a reason. You are trying to move past this. And it's very different. Like, you had Carrie Rawson on your show recently. I'm also going to interview her. I mean, we both have similar sort of circumstances. I mean,
for those of you who don't know, she is the daughter of the infamous BTK serial killer. We just had her on last week.
Yeah. And one of the things that, that you try to reconcile, whether, it's something as personal as your father murdering your mother, right? So you lose because I lost my whole family in the blink of an eye. But also when your father is of that, is you begin to think, at least for me, it's this way. I don't know for her. This is what I'm interested in talking to her about, is that you wonder, am I capable of such things? Is this me? I mean, and that's only natural, right? I mean, if you look, LeBron James has a son who plays basketball in high school. Everybody's like, is he going to be the next GOAT? Is he going to be, you know what I mean? It happens for this too. And I grew up under this sort of veil, or placed in this box of, this is the murderer's son. Doesn't matter what I did. Doesn't matter that my mother was the victim. So over the course of my relationships, my entire life, there's always been these whispers of, you gotta watch out, that guy, like, his father is a murderer, daughter, might want to be careful. So in my sort of process and healing from all this, I had to figure out, like, am I that person? And what does that look like for me? And how does that reconcile? Or how do I reconcile that? How do I get to a place where I can be comfortable with myself and say, I'm not capable of that type of damage, that type of violence, that type of destruction? And that ultimately led me, it's the whole reason I moved to Hollywood. It's the reason why I became a filmmaker, is to tell that story, right? And I did it with A Murder in Mansfield, and I continue to do it with the podcast, and I'm doing it with other content that I create to share that story. I mean, on my podcast, I read my father's letters from prison, because I want to point out what manipulation, narcissism, gaslighting, what these things are. Because my father has letters where he's telling me that my mother had caused herself to be murdered, created her own death, was running gold smuggling rings. I mean, just loony stuff. I have tapes that I'm getting ready to make other episodes out of, cassette tapes of interviews that he gives from prison when he was trying to get an appeal. And then the ways that he structures these letters. I mean, everything with these people is very calculated. And whether this applies to a Brian Walsh, whether this applies to the other Brian Kohberger, I don't know much about the Idaho 4 case, but it most certainly applied to John Meehan. There is a pathology to all of this. Yeah. And this is how these people behave. So if you recognize that, you go, is that learned? Is that something that's learned, or is that something that's inherited?
Yeah, that's got to be, extra difficult. Not to relate this to myself, but that's often the only way you can see things. And, people say that children of the Holocaust are traumatized because they've inherited that trauma. And in some ways I am,
Absolutely.
to what extent, I don't really know, but I've never even talked about it, I don't think, until right now, but there are things that, I definitely have a more anxious type personality, things that you definitely, my mother is very sort of paranoid from what she went through. And there's a
Sure.
trickle down effect, and you wonder about that. But enough about me. But
but that's true. But when you interviewed me, what was it like last year? You
yeah,
and Carm, when you guys were first starting this podcast, and we sort of got into the epigenetics issue.
yeah.
And I think we even said, hey, we're going to come back and I want to talk to Carm about this.
Well, I have to bring her back. She tried to retire on me, but I'm gonna bring her back.
She's got to keep you in line.
Yeah, exactly. So this comment from Miss Chris is obviously short and to the point. What a horrible burden for a child. Terra, I mean, you were older. I think you were 25.
Yes,
but,
25.
Yeah, but right now with this Anna Walsh case, she's leaving behind, much like Collier. What happened to Collier? Father's going to more than likely go to prison for life. The mother is dead, presumed dead, and there's a 6, a 4, and a 2-year-old. How much do you feel for those young children? And I guess if they're old enough for you to offer them advice, what would you say to them?
For me or for Collier?
For you, and then same question for Collier, I think.
I would say that, parents are flawed. As much as you might have like the best dad or best mom or, best 2 moms or best 2 dads or whatever, that parents are flawed no matter what. And no matter what situation you are in life, it's really great to have therapy or a coach with an unbiased opinion that is able to tell you what is healthy and what may be toxic, because coming from a household where trauma is the main thing, it's so important to learn how to cope. And those kids, coming from, I'm just assuming, a narcissist in this case, in a codependent relationship and an empath relationship, those kids are going to have a multiple of the spectrum of emotions. They're going to see their mom probably be the empath, and they're going to see the dad be the narcissist. So they're going to have different reactions, and they're going to take different roles in the family. Maybe one is going to become the protector, and maybe one is going to become more the empath. Maybe one is honestly a psychopath, a sociopath, or it depends on their brains, and it depends on how they were raised and how they're being raised from this point on. So I think that it's super important to have just kids in general in therapy.
And Collier, to you, same thing. I mean, you are one of these children. You're a touch bit older when it happened, but again, these kids are 6, 4, and 2, the Walsh children. If they were old enough to heed your advice, what would you say to them?
I'm going to take it just a step back, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What resonates with me the most of what is going through with these children, I mean, they're obviously much younger than I am. There's no body. And I know you're a man of the Jewish faith. There is a process that goes through. Your body gets returned to the earth, right? So from my understanding, I'm not Jewish. Like I said, I was raised Catholic, but there is a sort of rite of passage in that way. You process onto the afterlife. There's a finality to that. One of the things that was the most difficult for me is I was not allowed to go to my mother's funeral. And it wasn't until I was premiering my film in my hometown of Mansfield, Ohio, in the same theater that my mother used to volunteer at, filling sodas at the soda fountain for my friends. Before I got on that stage, before I went to that screening that day, I opened up my diary, and a prayer card from my mother's funeral that I was not allowed to go to fell out. I hadn't seen that thing in over a decade. I don't know how it got in there, but it did. I got up on that stage and I talked about how life is circadian and how that moment, I realized right then in that moment that that was my mother's funeral. And that we together as an audience in my hometown, we were finally laying her to rest, and I was finally able to lay her to rest. I often tell people a lot that that morning when I woke up and I went downstairs and I confronted my father, it was a race, and I haven't stopped running. I never took my foot off the gas. I still haven't. These kids are going to have to find a way to process this. And we can sit here and I can give them every adage in the book. We can give them all the advice in the world. I'm going to say for the adults around them, let them grieve. Let them process it. Don't tell them to suck it up and be tough, buddy. And when they come with these emotions, don't try to sweep them under the table, under the carpet. You need to allow these kids to have their experience with this. And this isn't going to happen right now. They're 2, 4, and 6. The 6-year-old maybe is sort of is going to process that his mother isn't coming back, but probably not. It's when they're older. It's when they get into adolescence, when they're young adults, this stuff starts to hit. I see so many people, and Terra does too, that we encounter that have been through massive trauma. And they don't begin to process these things until maybe they're in their 30s sometimes. And you think about, oftentimes you look at situations where you go, oh God, this guy really just fell off the deep end, like went crazy. Got to kind of like peel the onion back and look at like what people have been through in their lives, what trauma they've faced. Now, it might not be as extreme as their father murdered their mother and maybe chopped them into pieces. They were attacked in a parking garage by their stepfather and had to defend themselves and felt self-defense and take the life. But when we go through these things, we have to process them. We have to have that support system that allows us to process them. So to the adults, the responsibility that you're taking on is no joke. And you've got to be there for those children, but you've got to be all in. You've got to allow them that process. And you have to allow them to be angry. And you have to allow them to be happy. And you have to allow them to also, one of the things that Terra and I talk to when we talk to other survivors that have been through really crazy shit, is you have to be able to laugh about it and have a little bit of a sense of humor. You know, my mother had such a sardonic sense of humor. And she used to say to me as a kid, she used to say, Collier, famous last words. The night she was murdered, she was on the phone with her best friend. And my father comes down the driveway and in his truck, and she can see his mother in the passenger side. And she goes, well, he showed up with his mother, so he can't kill me tonight, I guess. Famous last words.
She knew.
You know, and I think that, you know, there's so much that goes into when you're processing this, because I have those memories of my mother, and these kids, of course, are going to have memories of their mother, but they're not. I had my mother for almost 12 years in my life. And they're going to then also process those memories as an adult from other stories from other adults that lived with their mom. I mean, one of the amazing things that came out of my podcast, and that continues to do so, that came out of the film, is I had relatives that were like second cousins, you know, or twice removed or whatever. They were people that were in my family that all wondered, like, what happened to Collier? And then they see me on television, they see me in movies, and then they see the podcast, and they come out. And you know, Terra was there. I was in New York City recently, and I got out of the Uber, and the woman was standing there, and she met my mother in the 1970s because she was married to my father's first cousin. And she just, her eyes started welling up with tears. And she goes, oh my God, you're a carbon copy of Noreen. And she had said that to me before, when she watched the podcast, because I put it on YouTube. And so people see my manners. You know, she said, you're exactly like your mother. Your manners. She's like, this is the same person that I met 30 years ago. And it's those little moments that you have. Man, that's the good stuff, guys. That's the good stuff. And that's what I wish for those kids. That they'll be able to get that. And that they'll look at people like myself. They'll look at people like Terra. They'll look at people like Carm. And they'll go, they made it. So can we.
One day, hopefully they'll be watching this or watching your podcast, and they can take something away from it. Want to give a shout out to Justice for Dan Markel. I see them in the chat area. I appreciate both of you. I know this is really tough. Perpetua Sridharan with a comment. I was a victim of domestic abuse, and people always ask, why did it take so long for me to leave? People cannot understand the level of control and fear the abuser holds. These guests are so brave. Terra, can you talk to that a little bit? I mean, it seems like your mom left Dirty John fairly quickly, but, others, back to Anna and Brian Walsh, I think it was in 2014, she filed a police report saying that Brian had threatened to kill her back then. What is it that makes it so difficult for people to separate from people who are potential evildoers?
These perpetrators, these narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, they love to use coercive control to get their victim, their, significant other locked in. And they use steps like trauma bonding, like these 7 steps of trauma bonding, where they first start out with love bombing. They may take you on lavish vacations, take you on great restaurants, buy you nice things, really dote on you, make you feel like you never really felt love like this before. And this is really a tactic. Some people may even just do this because they have a codependent relationship, but it's really important to give space in the beginning of a relationship and see what is love bombing and what is just, maybe I have a love language like gift giving. So for me, it may seem like love bombing, but it's really like, oh, that's my love language. I really like to give people gifts, and I love to do it for everyone. So that is something to take into note. If that person is giving gifts to everyone, even like their mother, their father and stuff, like that is great, but if they're just doting on you and giving you lavish gifts, that is something to be really concerned about. And then they start to kind of isolate you. And I may also get the 7 steps a little mixed up, but like isolation is a number one thing, where they start to kind of create issues with your friends and your family members, which what John did with my mom, where he was really able to isolate my mom, where he was the only one buzzing in her ear and feeding her information. So she didn't have people to bounce ideas off of, where like, oh, like this was weird today, that really creates the sense that you're alone in this relationship. And then they start to name call you and say like certain things, and they start to lie to you. And this is really the stage where like they're kind of creating that high and low effects, where the brain in these types of relationships, it's exactly like an addiction, because your brain lights up when you're getting this dopamine hit. And then when they're being mean to you, that's when you're like in the low effect. So they create this high and low effect of your brain where it craves this. And this is like a new neural pathway, or this might be a normal neural pathway to your brain, because the empath narcissist relationship, the codependent relationship, is the most common relationship. So it's really important to take all that into account. And then they start to gain like financial stability of you. And then there's a couple more steps, but by like the end of this, they had complete control over you, and your brain is actually telling you that this is normal and you need to stay in this. This is what love is. So your brain doesn't know any different when they're in this relationship, and you have to pull yourself out of it and tell your brain that it's not right. So when you get out of this relationship, and this is why it's so hard to leave, you're doing everything your brain is telling you not to do. So kudos to people that get out of this relationship.
Wow, that's, from a psychological standpoint, that's super fascinating. Forgive me if this is a question I should know the answer to, but how did he get the name Dirty John? And like Collier's dad, he was not some schmo. Like, he was fairly well off, right? I mean, he came from good means. We're not talking about someone that you would expect to, act a certain way. Is that right?
So he was a fake doctor.
Oh, okay.
Like,
So maybe he wasn't. No.
He had his nursing license, but then he got it pulled or something. He got in trouble for selling drugs to people. He had a long rap sheet, and he started out as a kid. His dad owned a casino, and he would literally scrape the ashes out of the trays. So he didn't have the best lifestyle for a kid. And so I'm assuming with his brain and with that lifestyle, that was what created him to be this kind of con artist person. And his father was always telling him, like, oh, we're from the mafia mentality. So that is what he grew up with. So he didn't have the normal childhood you would think. And then so he got the name Dirty John Meehan because his college buddies that he sold drugs to came to his wedding, and Tanya, his ex-wife, heard them say filthy Dirty John, and then Tanya actually came up with the name Dirty John.
Got it. Collier, this one's from Sharon M. Collier, lost my mother to cancer. I was age 12. She was 33. My father did not want me. I was blessed to live in a foster home who were wonderful people. Felt your pain in losing your mom so young. This person is indirectly, Sharon is, kind of indirectly a victim of, of domestic violence through neglect. The father didn't want her at all. But what's it mean to you that so many other victims, and to you too, Terra, but first to Collier, that so many other victims are now, looking up to you and coming to you for, sage advice?
I don't know how sage it is, at least for me. I will say this, though, what Terra just explained, I didn't even know until her and I became friends, and we were talking about this on my podcast, and she started spitting this out about coercive control. And I was like, wow, she just blew my mind. And she taught me about, fight, flight, or fawn. And I still learned so much from her because she's devoted so much time and dedication to really understanding what led her mother into this situation and ways that she could avoid it and also help other people avoid it. So I just want to mention that. That's one of the beautiful things that Terra does for everyone. So I want to give her kudos for that.
Thank you.
As far as myself, when I made the film A Murder in Mansfield, I had two things that I wanted to do. Well, three, really. I wanted to honor my mother and tell her story. I wanted to heal myself, whatever that looks like. And I wanted to reach out to that kid who was the same kid, abandoned by his family, living in a horrible foster care situation. In the nadir of his life, literally having to face down the monster and just it has no one there, right? I mean, there was a community there, but I had no interaction with people because I was the chief witness for the prosecution against my father. And I wanted to let that kid know, again, like I was saying before, that it's going to be okay, and reach out to that person. And I was touring around with the movie. I was in 60 different film festivals before it premiered on television. And I started getting these messages on Instagram in the message request folder, which I didn't see. It was like a year or two after. And I just happened to find this folder, and it must have auto-populated with thousands of messages from people, and just them reaching out and having seen the film. And it happens like every day. It's not now, it's the podcast as well. And then they see the film, or they find my story, or they listen to the podcast, or they've seen me speak somewhere. And unfortunately, the world is littered with stories like these, unfortunately. Now, I wouldn't say everyone that hits me up is, oh, my father murdered my mother. It's very rare. It has happened for sure. I even had a young man who approached me who literally was getting ready to take his own life because that happened, and literally turned on Amazon and saw my film and read it and watched it and said to me, "You are the reason that I am alive," which is still profound to have. I mean, that's just.
How did you react to him?
I mean, I mean, to hear something like that, I mean, and to get that message on Instagram, which is literally something that, social media is a very solipsistic art form, I feel, in a lot of ways. And, we're all chasing these things and this ideal lifestyle and stuff like that. But when you hear and you see something like that come to fruition, that just reminds you that this is exactly what life is all about. This is exactly why you've been through what you've been through, Collier, is to have this impact on people. But a lot of the people that reach out to me are mostly people who are survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, themselves as victims as children, which then leads to adulthood, which then leads them down the path of drug, alcohol, you name your vice, it happens. And or they get involved in these perpetually abusive relationships. It's a carbon copy. Each relationship is a carbon copy of the next. They're always in this fight or flight syndrome. They're always in fear because they're attracted to these things. And it's just a cycle that doesn't stop. And then they see the film, they hear my story, and they go, it's like a switch flips for them. And they say, if this guy can get through this, and this is the same way with Terra, these people can get through this, I can make it too. And they often will say, I was in this pity party state. And I just said, I got nothing to feel bad about. Look at how, it's always funny. It's funny to me, at least, when people come to me and they're like, well, I thought my shit was really bad, but then I heard your story and now I'm like, oh, I got nothing to complain about. And and look, it's not a competition. And I always tell people, and Terra does the same thing when she does her coaching, is, there is, everyone's journey is unique to themselves. Like one person's trauma is not bigger than another person's trauma. It's your own unique experience and how it relates to you. Right. But to be able to give people, to show people that there's hope, that you can make it through these things. I mean, this is exactly why we were put in these positions. And, I'm not particularly religious or spiritual. I mean, I'm a spiritual, I guess, to a certain degree. But, this is when you're kind of like, when you're trying to make sense of all of it, of the why of everything, you realize that this is the reason. So you could be the strong one that can show people the light.
By the way,
the first to light the candle.
Something you said struck me. I left news in 2018, but then when there was a building collapse in Florida, and this will make sense in a moment, I live not far from there. So CBS News called me back and I went back to reporting. And one of the things, it was a predominantly Jewish and Hispanic filled building. One of the things I've since found out is, and this is morbid, so I will, say that ahead of time as a disclaimer, many of the Jewish people's caskets remain unsealed still, because they're still going through in a separate warehouse all of the rubble from that building. And if they find, according to Jewish law, the smallest piece of human tissue, they have to identify it. So there is that finality and there is that closure, which is giving me goosebumps right now. But that goes back to your point, Collier, that like these kids, the Walsh children, will never have that closure. There will probably never be a body, because they say that the mother was literally incinerated. So I know you raised, the issue of Jewish burial finality. So there is this issue of a lot of people, many people say don't ever use the word closure, but I'll use it right now. This issue of closure, and at least for the Walsh children, And even some of these people, and this was in June of 2021, if you think about it, their caskets, some of them remain open so that there is still closure to come.
That was in Surfside, wasn't it?
Surfside, yeah, which is close to where I live. This next comment, right back to you, Colliers, from Caroline Ciano. It would have been so easy for you to become rage-filled. And Terra, I guess this applies to you as well. What do you feel stopped you from reacting in self-destructive ways? Why are you not in an alley in Hollywood shooting up heroin, Collier? Why are you hosting a podcast? Why did you make a movie? What put you in that direction?
Because I'm an outlier. I mean, that's literally what a psychologist told me. They discovered the podcast last summer, and they said, they just kind of looking at me and they go, if you were literally shooting heroin under a bridge in East LA, you have every right to do that. And no one would also blame you for that because of what you've been through and the fact that you are this functioning, caring. She said the word that she uses, you're an empathetic and caring, genuine person that cares about people that they come in contact with. That's how you make people feel, which is, again, I hear this from people that knew my mother and said, you're a carbon copy of her, because that's how she was. She's like, that's what makes you just so extraordinary. And this isn't to prop myself up or anything, but like, what makes me an outlier. But all that was learned. I learned that from my mother, and I continue to learn it because I hear stories about her, or I read things. There was somebody that just messaged me on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook a lot, but like in the Messenger, and I use the Instagram app, and you know the confusion, right? But somebody sent me a photograph of a teddy bear that he was a poorer kid, and my mother made him a teddy bear, and he still has it 35 years later. And somebody at the film came up to me and gave me a sweater that my mother had given their mother for them, that she knitted for them. And every year, and I talked about this in my Christmas episode a couple of weeks back, my mother every year at Christmas would make me go down to my toys and get half of them. And it wasn't like just the ones that I didn't want. I had to pick ones that it had to hurt, because she said to me, Collier, you have a mommy and daddy that loves you. Santa Claus always comes, but there are kids that don't get to experience Santa Claus. And we would go and we would donate those toys to Toys for Tots, because my mother was very, very keen. And ironically, my father was like that in a lot of ways. My father was very interesting because he was such a monster, but he would have these little moments of of clarity, like an alcoholic has a moment of clarity. But these are things that I learned from my mother that I just carried on. And I think, you look at epigenetics with trauma. Well, I also feel there's maybe a flip side of epigenetics with just overall goodness and genuine authenticity and care and compassion for your fellow man. We are all capable of that. I watched the Shaquille O'Neal documentary recently. I know you're a sports fan, so I can say this, but he said something that was so profound to me. And I was like, this just sums up Shaq anyways. But he said, it costs you nothing to be nice. I was like, damn. I said that to Terra recently because we were talking about a fellow survivor that was very nasty with us. I said, it costs him nothing to be nice. It's a really profound statement. But back to what she was saying, we were talking to someone earlier today. And I said, I often think about, you hear about resilience, and everybody talks about, especially in sports, oh, it was a resilient team, blah, blah, blah. Really what resilience is that you go through something that is so extreme. You go through something that is so extreme, and this trauma, and that's not what defines you. It is what you choose to do with that defines you. So for me, it was to share that light, right, in my mother's name. For some people, it's to bottle it all up inside, put a lid on it, and say, I fucking hate the world. The world owes me this. The world owes me that. I had a terrible childhood. I had this handed to me. My dad murdered my mother. Fuck everyone. I have a right to do what I want. I'm going to be a nasty person. I don't mean to be so, animated about it, but the truth is that people do that, and then they turn, that is what they become. That is what they leave. And I just was like, I'm not going to do that. I just remember at 12 years old, just saying to myself, you're going to do the right thing. You're going to do this for your mother, because it's very easy to just run and hide and put your head in the pillow and be like, I just want to turn out the lights. I want to turn off the world, stop the world. I want to get off, and let the adults handle it. But no, I chose to be the adult. My family didn't want to be the adults, So I made that choice at a very early age because, I was speaking to the FITM, the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, about a month ago, talking about social media. I have a large TikTok following, so I was talking about TikTok and social media and content creation, and centered around true crime and mental health. And I said, the thing is that when you do these things, yeah, everybody says YOLO and live in the moment and all that stuff, but you also have to think, you have to look yourself in the mirror. And I am so glad that I had that in me, that was instilled obviously from my mother, that I did the right thing. And I went down swinging. I did everything I could, because I can't imagine, you leave it all out in the field, you leave it all out in the court, you leave it all out in life, and you do your absolute best, because you don't want to look in the mirror and go, I should have done something differently. I should have spoken up. I should have said, no, you're not going to get away with this. Instead, I went with it, and he got away with it. Or he got a slap on the wrist. Because if it's interesting, because when I engage with other people and I see these cases, I think about what would have happened if my father's trial was now, and the brinksmanship that would be played with the lawyers and the court system. I mean, because it was already next level in 1990, but there was no Twitter, TikTok, internet, anything. I can't imagine what it would be like now. It would be a circus, and motion after motion. I mean, a lot of that depends on resources of the defendant, but also there are lawyers that will take up cases pro bono just to do it, just for the notoriety of all of it. So I think that when I look at all of those things, I look in the mirror and I go, I did it right. If I take my last breath 5 minutes from now, I did it right.
Amen, brother. And I think you're right. Everything is amplified for sure today, exponentially from what it was like back in 1990. I'm laughing right here because Art King of Whole Foods commented, Joel's drinking soda. I'm telling Carm, it's true. I have a Coca-Cola addiction. Got off it for 8 weeks. My poor little dog died at 17, and I fell off the bandwagon. I'm not as strong as you guys. I got to get back on there.
I lost my Chihuahua. I lost my girl Chihuahua on October 30th. She was 4 months shy of her 18th birthday.
Wow. Yeah, it's not, honestly, there's nothing worse.
No, but there is a new light.
Yeah, that's tough to deal with. And then someone else commented and said, how on earth have you not heard of Dirty John? And my answer to that is I've got an 8, a 6, and a 3-year-old, but I am a news guy. I should know, so I am guilty of that. But the best thing about being a news guy is you get to ask questions and find out. So
exactly.
Again, this next message here from comment from Marie Hernandez. Collier, what advice would you give for an emotionally abused person who struggles with constant guilt in their mind for not being a good person? That's definitely a mind F right there, but it is what a lot of victims go through. Collier, words of wisdom to her?
Well, I guess the FCC is listening, so I won't use the F word. But no, I concur with that. It's interesting that they brought this up, because I was laying in bed last night, like thinking about our conversation that we were going to have today. And one of the things that came up in my mind was cognitive dissonance. I feel like that's something that is not talked about enough in trauma and trauma recovery. And I feel like this is a classic example of this, because you have this person, you're emotionally abused and you've been knocked down by that abuse. And then you're knocking yourself down on the flip side for feeling bad for not being a good person. And I mean, look, I'm not a therapist or a psychologist or anything like this. And I feel like I could hand this off to Terra and she'd have some really, really good pearls of wisdom. But I think that you have to learn how to forgive yourself first, because it's all about you. And you have to, I think, what you can do, and if I'm interpreting this question right, and I might not be, so full disclosure, but you're processing the abuse that was caused to you, and you're processing it on another person, which is the cycle of abuse, right? And then that is creating this dissonance in your mind. It's like the person that goes, okay, or people that are drinking Coca-Cola, 20 Coca-Colas, and saying, but I'm diabetic. That wouldn't be you, but I'm just saying. But in all seriousness, people, I struggled often on, I would drink too much alcohol, and I would go through this, as many people do that deal with using and overusing substances. And I would battle myself like, this isn't healthy, Collier. Then I get up and I go run 5 miles. And then I'd be like, next month I do the same thing again. I'd be like, what are you doing? Like, you're hungover. Like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. And I think that if you look at it and you break it down, you don't want to, you need to, first of all, I think, say the buck stops here. I'm not going to continue the cycle of abuse because it's just going to continue. It's going to perpetuate. And not only is that abuse, if you're inflicting abuse or not being a good person on others, but also not being a good person to yourself. You have to learn how, and all that really starts with forgiveness. And when I talk about forgiveness a lot with people, because people will say, well, how could you forgive your father? He's such a horrible person. I'm like, because it's not about him. It's about me. It's about me saying this will no longer have any power over me. And if you say, I won't let this past history of abuse have any more power over me and force me to not be the person that I want to be to the people around me that I love and care about, that's where you need to get with that. That's my tough love Tony Robbins statement right there. Call Joe Berlinger. I'm ready for a documentary.
So, Terra, I'm curious, how did you and Collier meet and develop this podcast relationship?
Well, thank you for asking. I just had to add one thing to him because I'm going to quote Dr. Mani and say, if you're even thinking about if you are a good person or not, that means that you have empathy. And for you to even have that question would mean like you're not narcissistic and you're thinking about your behavior in this instant. And we're all human, so we all make mistakes. But as long as you're thinking about your behavior, that's a good thing. And just have grace for yourself with certain things, and I tell this to Collier all the time. Have grace with this moment because we shouldn't be so hard on ourselves, and we need to be reminded that by each other. Have grace because we're human. And then so how Collier and I met is I was actually on his podcast. His old podcast partner had contacted me and set up an interview. I also asked if I could have my mom on. So Collier came on and he interviewed me for the first part. Then my mom came on, and then I just started when my mom was on, I went and I Googled him. I checked out all our mutual friends, and then I was so curious about our story that I wanted to connect with him in person. So I then planned a true crime meetup just to meet Collier.
No, she didn't. No.
Well, no, okay, I do them, but this time I was like, I want to meet him and connect with him. So, like, I'll plan a true crime meetup and invite him and other survivors so I can, meet him, because his story was so similar and parallels to mine. Maybe not so much that he took his dad down in court, but he took down someone, and I took down Dirty John, and then they were both quote unquote,
they're both dad, Johns.
Yeah. His dad was doctor. John was a fake doctor. John also worked in Ohio at one point. He worked with, well, Collier's dad actually worked with Tanya's, who is John's ex-wife's husband.
There's a weird parallels for sure.
Yeah. So like it was funny because I started asking around about him and then there was all these parallels.
And Terra, how do you reconcile taking a life? I'm just curious in your mind. Is it, I mean, obviously it was in self-defense. Do you have days where you are, you don't handle it as well as other days?
That's quite the segue, Joe.
Joel. Dig right in.
Right?
I'm not gonna lie, just even getting asked that question is hard.
Yeah.
It takes a minute for me to pause, then I honestly feel guilty. And I feel sad that I had to do that. I would never wish that on my worst enemy. There's just a lot of stuff that I deal with my body and from that attack, and it just sucks, but I'm happy that my family is not living in fear. I'm happy that so many other women aren't living in fear themselves because he had so many lawsuits against other women that he manipulated and turned situations around on them. Like he assaulted a woman and he lost all his teeth, like not all his teeth, but like a good amount of teeth. And then he sued her and got veneers from her. So it's like, honestly, if he wasn't dead, I would still be living in survival mode, fear every day. And so I have to kind of look at that and be like, okay, I'm not living in fear. For me, this is a conclusion. For me, this is a closed chapter. I'm still dealing with the trauma, but at least I don't have to deal with him anymore. He's not around.
And that's, I think, the right, you know, a great answer. I mean, it's finality for you, and it's obviously something you needed. It was it was an unfortunate way for things to unravel, but I mean, you have to protect yourself. And this goes back to what Wendy Murphy was saying. If you don't look out for yourself first, no one will. And she even said on the podcast, you know, kill or be killed. And it takes an immense amount of courage to do that, I think. I mean, I don't know that I'd be able to do that. Maybe I would just suffer with the abuse or the, you know, or the violence. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it takes a tremendous amount of courage. But Collier, I know you were going to say something.
Yeah, Joel, I just want to take the baton from Terra for a second. One of the things that I told Terra straight away from hearing her story, and, you know, she got emotional just like she did here, because I asked her, you know, in one of the episodes, because I interviewed her again, like right after, because my brother, who's my adoptive parents' son, was like, you know, did you think about asking her this? And I said, I actually did. I wish I had. I was a little nervous talking to her because she's super famous, right? And I said, I asked her about the same thing, like, how do you reconcile that? But I also told her, and I firmly believe this, if she didn't do what she did, her entire family would be dead. She would be dead and her family would be dead, because this is the same behavior that my father had. And I recognized it immediately. And I wasn't even familiar with the show. I mean, I actually had friends that worked on the show, but I wasn't familiar with the show. I never listened to the podcast, and I listened to it afterwards. The behaviors are so similar. And this is one of the things that Terra and I talk about all the time with this narcissism, sociopathy, psychopathy. Look, they're all in the same vein, right? But psychopathy would be probably the most extreme. But they all carry this, this vendetta, this grievance that the perpetrator has, this sense of injustice or entitlement that they have, and that they're going to right these wrongs, and they're going to take anyone out who gets in their way or who they feel have injured them. I mean, she's telling the story about he assaults a woman, and then she knocks his teeth out, and then he sues her and gets veneers. I mean, that is just, it's disgusting. And I firmly believe that if I hadn't been the one to step up for my father, that he would have killed someone again. People often ask me, do you think that he ever did it before and got away with it? I was like, I don't know. It's definitely a question to be asked. And I also think, I know that he would have continued, because if you get away with it once, there's nothing stopping these people until they are actually stopped.
And that's an amazing point. And I'll bring this comment up right away to that point from Chloe's mom. Never doubt yourself. You did the right thing. You saved yourself and your family. I just want to be clear. No way was I questioning Terra and whether she should or should not have done it. I firmly believe she should have done it. But it's just, we're all human beings. So it's how do you deal with it after the fact?
Yeah.
And I think that's, if we're all humans, there's such a range of emotion, I know you didn't want to do what you did, but I'm curious with a kind of a.
I don't think Terra took it that way, by the way. It didn't come across that way.
I just had to like.
It's a difficult question.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I was watching you were on some show on British television, and the guy was sort of a pompous, typical British host, and he put that question out there in not such a subtle way. And so I hope I didn't do that.
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
And I totally have said this before, the killer be killed also. And I got that from The Walking Dead. Because how I defended myself against John was I killed him like a zombie. Because I watch a lot of Walking Dead. So in my mind, I was already thinking killer be killed. And also not today, Satan. Not today.
I'm curious. You said that you work with dogs. Do you still do that? And how have dogs played a role in your life in terms of emotional support?
So I work a little bit with dogs. I'll walk my friends' dogs. I'll watch friends. Sometimes I'll rescue dogs and find them homes, or cats too. But I'm allergic to cats, so that's not so great for me. But I can't work like I used to. I can't do the job that I used to. I was stalked there, and my dog was in my attack with me because he barked. It is one of my main triggers. And so if a dog is barking for a long time, I can get to a place where I'm very triggered, on edge, and I will have to go work out because I'll want to self-harm. I haven't self-harmed in a while, but I get to the point where I want to hurt myself because I want to go into fight mode, because that is my body's reaction to protecting myself in that one circumstance. And so my body has adapted that is my way of survival. I've done so much EMDR since that my body actually pauses and doesn't go straight into fight mode. I now process it. And so I've come a long way since, but working with dogs is unfortunately just not a thing I can do anymore. That event changed my life completely around, and changed my career, everything. So that's why I also feel it's my dharma to speak and advocate for victims, because I also worked with my mom, and my story has created a law in California for coercive control. So if you are with someone that is doing all the 7 stages of trauma bonding and whatnot, and is not laying a hand on you, but you're being emotionally manipulated, you have a law in California to now help you get a restraining order and so on. So I've been really interested in helping other people heal from narcissistic, toxic relationships, and also teaching people how to survive, and what the body goes into, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode, and learning how to cope and get out of that fight mode, freeze mode, or whatever mode you're in, to get back to homeostasis, the baseline of the body.
And how is your mom doing today and the rest of your family?
She's doing okay. She actually doesn't really want to speak about it anymore because of the victim shaming. It's to the point where people will call her, email her, and it's really sad because I work with a lot of other victims like Rita Isbell, who her brother was killed by Jeffrey Dahmer, and it's like people get threats for speaking out about their story. I get told I'm a killer on the daily, especially on TikTok. TikTok is
Yeah.
not a nice place. The victim shaming is super hard, and I think that's why like Collier and I talk about it a lot because it's really not fun. And I think Collier, like we both go through it, but I'm gonna be honest. Women actually go through it a little bit more than men do.
Sure.
Um, Not disregarding, any of those comments towards you, Collier, because they are terrible, horrific. People shouldn't do
No,
that.
but you're right. You're absolutely right.
But women do get the grunt of why? Why didn't you leave? Oh, she's a killer. She asked for this. She did this, And they see, they Collier gets this question too, but like men, it's a little bit less.
It's significantly less. And these victims, and these crimes are also perpetrated 95% on women to begin with. I mean, not that they aren't, not that stalking and coercive control doesn't affect men, because it does.
Yeah.
Whether they're in a same-sex relationship, a heterosexual relationship, what have you. But it's the majority is men perpetrating it against women. It's a power thing, and it's very insidious.
But there's also so much collateral damage, like the
Massive.
violence. The violence is the rock being thrown into the pond, but then that ripple effect, it hits so many. I mean, it crosses generations. So it's the men and the women and the women and the men.
Yeah.
Collier, I see the guitars behind you. What does music do for you?
Well, I mean, I did a whole TED talk about this, right? So for me, I was always involved in the arts, and that was something that my mother was very keen on supporting as a kid. And I was the kid who would literally, school would end, I would get a week off to play with my friends, and I would go back to like summer school programs, whether it be in science, whether it be in art, music, all those things, right? One of the great sort of losses that came around that time period was I had just started learning how to play piano, and then my mother was murdered, and I couldn't go to piano lessons anymore because I couldn't talk to anyone. It was about the case, so that kind of went by the wayside. But I was able to still sing, and so I ended up going to music school. I got a scholarship, and I went to Ohio University Conservatory of Music, School of Music, and I went to Oberlin Conservatory, and then I dropped out about 2.5 years in, and I moved to Los Angeles. And I was like, and I was telling somebody this earlier today, I said, I'm either going to make it as a rock star, become famous, and tell my story and help people, or I'm going to become a filmmaker, make a film, tell my story and help people. And that's what I ended up doing. I ended up becoming a filmmaker. But I love the guitars, and I'm still a great singer. And I open up my podcast every week just because it seems to stick. And I do Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On." So that's become my little shtick, and I'm gonna have to put that on T-shirts with my face on "What's Going On," because now people say it to me, and they say #MoverNation, and it's very funny. But no, I love music. It is art. That was one of the ways that I really processed what I went through. I think there's a lot of artists that have been through extreme trauma and pain, and it's an obvious. I mean, look at the Holocaust and the art that generated for so many people. I remember a person I was just in absolute awe of when I met him. He came to Ohio University with Elie Wiesel, and I was just like, man, Night was like one of those books. I was like, you talk about stories that people hear my story, and it's like I hear that, or Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and you just what what. And it's things like that, but out of it comes these isn't it the Jerusalem tulip that goes through extreme hardship and then it blooms this beautiful flower and it takes forever? Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
And you think about how there's a great saying, pressure either bust pipes or it turns coal into a diamond, and I think that's the beautiful thing about art, is that you're able to process and use that artistically. For me, it became the visual arts that really became how I processed, and now obviously a podcast. And that became like how I channeled what I did. It started with photography. But
it's interesting.
And music. Yeah. So
no, it's interesting that art comes out of pain a lot of times, but you get that beautiful 100%. Music and literature, etc. Laura's aura. I think we'll make this the last comment. Is there anything? I'll ask both of you. Is there something that we didn't discuss that we should have discussed, Terra?
Well, I'm seeing a lot of comments about therapy, and I just have to make 2 comments about that. So first of all, like 3. So first of all, for therapy, choose your therapist. Like, vet them out. You're on a date with them. Your therapist is going to be the person that's going to help you. And also your therapy should be covered in your insurance by at least like 6 sessions. 6 or 10 sessions, something like that. And then Collier and I also do coaching, trauma coaching. We have a weekly meeting where you come in for 5 weeks and like do a coaching session with me, Collier, and a bunch of other people in our group. So if you need like different modalities of healing, we also do that, and you can learn more about everything that I kind of talked about.
On Terra's website.
Point, I was going to say, Laura's aura said, I just wanted to put that out there. Therapy has allowed me to calm down and carry on. A lot of love and support from my friends who've been with me for 40 years. I have to say, that's incredible. Dad is a retired psychiatrist. My beautiful mother is a retired social worker. So they are super pro therapy because that's what they did for a living, and I highly recommend it. It won't work on me; I'm too damaged, but it could work on other people. Listen, I don't even know where to begin in terms of thanking you two. This was way more than I bargained for in terms of what I got out of it. I think it's really an amazing session, amazing podcast. Terra Newell, as you know by now, is a survivor and advocate for victims of domestic abuse. At 25 years old, she defended herself against serial predator Dirty John Meehan. Apparently, I'm the only one in America that did not know this story, with 80 million downloads, which is insane. And she's currently working with Collier on a podcast called Survivor Squad. With that, Terra, what are your final thoughts about everything we discussed here?
I think today was great conversations. I really appreciate you having me on your platform and having certain discussions. I think that just if anyone wants to find me or Collier, go check us out on Instagram. I'll let him do his spill, but my Instagram handle is Terra, TerraNewell, and I have a website, Terra Newell Survival .com. Not at, but TerraNewellSurvival.com.
I'll let him do his spill. I'm going to use that from now on. Collier Landry, he gained widespread recognition as the creator and subject of A Murder in Mansfield. It was a film directed not by just anyone, but 2-time Oscar winner Barbara Kopple. Collier now hosts the award-winning Moving Past Murder podcast, which, as you can tell, offers his unique perspective on surviving true crime and overcoming adversity. He's got over 1.5 billion views on YouTube amassed. He's a TEDx talker. He's been on Dr. Phil, but now he's been on The Real Show, Surviving the Survivor, twice, not once.
Twice, yes, thank you, twice.
Yeah, Collier. So same question to you. How do we close out this profoundly deep and moving podcast?
And I wish I want to just clarify. I wish my podcast has 1.5 billion views on YouTube. That is what my work has because I'm a cinematographer. So I've directed some very big music videos that have just
we'll go with it anyway.
Sounds good. Hey, we'll go with it anyways. Yeah, I mean, I don't want people to think like, oh God, this guy's just balling over there. No, but in all sincerity, Joel, thank you so much for having both Terra and myself on. It's a great. I miss Carm on this one, but hopefully we'll have her back soon.
Real quickly,
thank you for having us, and shout out to Stephen Cohen, by the way, for hooking us up.
100%. But Terra, I was going to say what I would love to do is if your mom would do it, bring your mom on one more time with my mom, who's a survivor and a therapist. I think that would be pretty amazing. So let's do it.
It would be great.
She likes talking to therapists because she feels understood. So she might be down for this.
Okay, you let me know. Collier, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that was
you're. I think that's
promotion on my part.
I support that 100%. I would just leave with this, and I said it earlier in the program, but it's I think really at the end of the day, you just got to be kind to yourself and your fellow man. And my podcast started out as a sort of true crime thing, just because I was kind of known that my Forensic Files episode is one of the most popular ever. I'm known as that kid from Forensic Files, right? But I really now focus more on the mental health aspect of all of this and consumption of true crime and hearing about these horrible things. And I can just say this, and I know Terra would echo my sentiments here, as would Carm, and I'm sure most people who've been through these types of things, is that the world really is a beautiful, amazing place. Despite all of these things that happen and that we see these things and it's force-fed to us, and there's a lot of tragedy, but there's so much beauty in the world. And you just have to open yourself up to that. And that's the incredible thing. You can find me on all the social medias at Collier Landry. You can find me on my website. That is collierlandry.com. My podcast is a Signal Award winner for 2022. It is called Moving Past Murder. You can check that out wherever you get your podcast from. My podcast with Terra Newell is called Survivor Squad. We are launching it very soon, this winter, this spring. Check us out. We have a fantastic first full season of guests, from Amanda Knox to Mark Vicente from The Vow on HBO, to Kelsey German from the Delphi murder case, to Rita Isabel, whose brother's life was taken at the hands of the psychopath Jeffrey Dahmer, and others. So, Joel, thank you so much for having us.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing podcast. Through all its ugliness, life is in fact beautiful. Everyone hang in there. Thank you both to Terra Newell and Collier Landry for this. What an amazing podcast. Definitely goes down as one of my personal favorites in the archives. Until next time, love you, America.